Saudi Arabia's sentencing to death of 5 people deemed a mockery of justice. A string of human rights organisations saying the country has allowed those really responsible for the killing of Jamal Khashoggi to go free. 16 activists, including the Turkish businessman and philanthropist Osman Kavala, facing fresh hearings in Turkey today, accused of orchestrating the country's anti-government protests 6 years ago. I'll talk to our correspondent Jasper Mortimer in Ankara shortly. And as Santa heads off for his yearly travels, fears that the tourism boom in Lapland is badly impacting the area's indigenous Sami people and having a bad impact on the environment as well. Good to have you with us. I'm Stuart Norval here on France 24. A mockery of justice. That's the accusation from at least one UN investigator who accused Saudi Arabia of allowing the masterminds of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi to go free. 5 people sentenced to death and 3 to jail over the murder, as the courts there rejected the findings of a UN inquiry by ruling that the killing was not premeditated but was carried out at the spur of the moment. Claire Rush reports.
Whitewash, pretense of justice, the words of rights groups and the UN to describe Saudi Arabia's sentencing of 5 people to death over the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
Utter disappointment, and on the other hand, feeling that it was a predictable outcome. What we have is a mockery of justice.
The Saudi trial concluded that last year's slaying of Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul was neither premeditated nor ordered by the Saudi government, a ruling that contradicts the UN's findings that Riyadh was responsible. Critics of the trial say it only served to punish low-level agents instead of the masterminds behind the crime. Turkey has lashed out, with President Erdogan's top press aide writing, to claim that a handful of intelligence operatives committed this murder is to mock the world's intelligence. He also said Turkey would continue its efforts to shed light on the killing that took place on its territory. Conspicuously absent, however, is an official reaction from the White House. President Donald Trump has been careful not to lay the blame at the Crown Prince's feet in a bid to maintain good relations with a major arms buyer and ally against Iran. But some U.S. lawmakers are going public with their condemnation.
This sentence is a continuation of the kingdom's effort to distance Saudi leadership, including the Crown Prince, from the brutal assassination of a journalist and U.S. resident, Jamal Khashoggi. This was a premeditated murder, not a snap decision or rogue operation.
Some, though, welcomed the verdict. One of Khashoggi's sons, who lives in Saudi Arabia and is seen here meeting Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, tweeted that the Saudi judiciary was fair and achieved justice for us. The identities of the convicted have not yet been released.
Now, they stand accused of trying to topple the government in Turkey. Today, 16 activists, including the Turkish businessman and philanthropist Osman Kavala, facing a fresh hearing in a trial widely criticised by Western countries. The 16 accused of orchestrating the anti-government protests in Istanbul's Gezi Park 6 years ago. Earlier this month, the European Court of Human Rights saying they should all be released, citing a lack of reasonable suspicion that they'd actually committed any offence. Well, we're going to cross live to Ankara. We're going to speak to our correspondent Jasper Mortimer, who joins us from there. Jasper, despite those comments by the European Court, why then is the government actually going ahead with this trial?
Well, the Gezi protests in 2013 lasted 16 days. They involved up to 30,000 protesters in Istanbul and thousands more here in Ankara and some 80 cities around the country. They were the biggest and most sustained challenge to President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's rule. However, like the Gilets jaunes protests in France, they had no one big-name leader. They were led by hundreds of low-profile people whom nobody remembers today. They were truly a mass movement driven by widely held grievances. But for Erdogan, this is unacceptable. Erdogan told his supporters that Gezi was a coup attempt. And in a sense, this trial is an attempt to prove that, to show that these weren't just normal, democratically minded protesters, that they were, in fact, subversives. Now, for the half of the Turks who don't vote for Erdogan, who don't believe that the Gezi Park protests were a coup attempt, this trial serves a second purpose, that of trying to intimidate the opposition. You know, this month, various human rights groups such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Euromed Human Rights have issued statements condemning the trial, saying that the charges are bogus. But they've also said that the trial is basically an attempt to punish dissent in Turkey, quote, to create a climate of fear in Turkey.
So, Jasper, what then do you think could actually come out of this hearing then?
Well, today's hearing is going to be a normal one. Witnesses will be called. The question everybody is asking is, will the court heed the recommendation of the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg and release Osman Kavala? Last year, the Strasbourg court said that the Kurdish politician, the leader of the People's Democratic Party, Selahattin Demirtas, should be released from prison. But the Turkish courts ignored that ruling.
Jasper, thanks very much. Jasper Mortimer, correspondent, joining us from Ankara. Now, Russian-backed Syrian forces have gained ground in the country after a week-long renewed assault against the last opposition enclave in Syria's northwest, the biggest such push in more than 3 months that's prompted a large civilian exodus there. Intense aerial strikes on civilian areas, breaking months of stalemate on the front lines. It comes as Turkey and Russia have been holding talks on the situation in the area, where they're on opposite sides of the civil war. Alison Sargent has more.
These Syrian women and children are waiting to receive food aid. They've been sleeping outside since they arrived here in the north of Idlib province after fleeing airstrikes on cities further south.
I
swear to God, we don't even have a spoon to eat with. We couldn't take anything with us because of the shelling.
Despite a ceasefire announced in August, Syrian forces supported by Russian airstrikes have intensified their assault on Idlib in recent days. The province is the last in Syria held by opposition fighters and jihadists opposed to the regime. Since last week, Russian and Syrian forces have taken back dozens of towns around the strategic city Ma'aret Anoman, sending tens of thousands fleeing north toward Turkey.
Leaving was really complicated, practically impossible. When we were on the road, we were barely moving, and there were lots of people. You'd move 10 meters, and then you couldn't move 10 meters more. And it was at night. There were bombs. Everyone was fleeing their homes.
The United Nations is calling for the fighting to stop immediately. Making the humanitarian situation worse, the UN Security Council's mandate to deliver aid to the province expires on January 10th.
Those against?
Last week, Russia and China vetoed a resolution for a one-year extension. They put forward a rival proposal that was also voted down.
Now, some other world news, and the under-fire Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has met people affected by the huge bushfires there at a relief centre in Adelaide Hills in South Australia. One woman who lost her home to the fires on Friday, telling him it's pretty heart-wrenching. Morrison, much criticised after going on holiday as the fires continue to rage. Around 40,000 hectares have been burnt across South Australia, but about 5 million hectares across the country overall. That's still 200 fires burning in 4 states. 25 people have been killed as a passenger bus plunged into a ravine on Indonesia's Sumatra Island. Police saying its brakes appeared to have malfunctioned. At least 14 other people hospitalised. The crash happened just before midnight on Monday on a winding slope in the south of the island. And the huge strikes here in France still severely disrupting transport across the country, and particularly here in Paris, with little let-up expected over the rest of the Christmas period. Protesters even scuffling with police inside the Gare de Lyon station as they let off flares, smoking out platforms and closing parts of the station. Union leaders threatening to ramp up action at oil facilities now as the protesters continue to fight against the pension reforms of President Emmanuel Macron. Now it is, a real snowy wonderland of reindeer rides, ice castles, snowmobiles and igloo hotels, where it is, in fact, Christmas virtually 365 days a year. I'm talking about the Santa Claus Village amusement park. It's in Finland's remote Lapland region. But now the tourism boom, is rather facing a backlash, in fact, over concerns about the impact on the area's indigenous Sami people and as well implications for the environment.
Santa Claus Village on the Arctic Circle is about as close to a real-life Christmas card scene as it's possible to get. Every passing winter breaks new tourism records in Finland's slice of Lapland, which for decades has marketed itself as the real home of Father Christmas. Visitors, especially from Europe, stayed for an all-time high of 3 million nights last year, and Lapland tourism is now catching on in lucrative new markets, such as China.
We see big differences in what activities the different customer groups like to do here. Dog sledding and longer hikes are popular with French visitors, for example. British travelers are especially interested in snowmobiles, and the Asian tourists are most keen on seeing the northern lights.
Thanks to the boom, unemployment in the town of Rovaniemi is at its lowest in 3 decades. But for residents used to rural tranquility, mass tourism is a growing concern. Many complain of disruption and mess left behind by the thousands of visitors. Lapland's indigenous reindeer herding Sami community accuses the tourist industry of spreading offensive stereotypes of witches and shamans and profiting at the expense of their ancient culture. Plus, there's the heavy emissions cost of flying to the Arctic, an area scientists say is heating up twice as fast as the global average.
We are very dependent on flight traffic. So we are trying to communicate tourists that they would compensate their flight when they come to Lapland and also use the local services, use the local products.
Valentine Beats grew up in Botswana but moved to Finland 2 decades ago and says his thriving husky sledding business has been a long-term dream. He caters to more and more eco-aware tourists who care about animal welfare and the green credentials of his operation.
If you want to differentiate yourself from your competitors or something, this is one of the ways of doing it. And there is a growing slice of the, or a growing group of people who actually think this is important.
It's 22 days until Christmas.
As the days count down to Christmas, one man insists that all the extra visitors to his grotto won't leave him rushing to deliver all the presents, thanks to his time-slowing machine. The rest of Lapland's tourist industry is having to learn to balance the complex.
Santa getting ready there. And if you're already entering into the Christmas spirit, literally, perhaps you've already had a little bit too much and have got a little bit of a headache at the moment. If so, this one is for you. A museum of hangovers has opened up in the Croatian capital Zagreb, showcasing objects and amusing stories from drunken escapades around the globe. Now, it features such thing as a stop sign and a plastic potted plant laid out in a series of rooms meant to recreate the zigzaggy walk home from the bar. Visitors start apparently in the street room, whose walls are covered in graffiti, as you can see there, before winding through the room of mirrors that represent storefronts, past a home's garden and into a messy room, as it's called apparently, where partiers finish the night.
We wanted to collect objects that people woke up with without knowing where they picked them up. And so the idea is to collect these objects and the stories that go with them, to allow visitors to identify with them, to laugh, to have fun, and to leave here happy.
Interesting idea. I'm feeling all right at the moment. I'm not quite sure how I'll feel in 24 hours. We'll see. More news coming up here on France 24 in 15 minutes' time. Stay with us.